always knew it.
Wednesday, March the 26th. Don't forget.
Nobody can do it.
Have a Big Mac in hell.
Like McDonald's can.
Have a McHappy Day.
Coming up next, Webster, live from Victoria.
Good morning. My old friend Jack Scott, who died recently, used to say with his tongue not very far in his cheek that Victoria, British Columbia, was the city of the newlywed and the nearly dead. I wouldn't possibly ever say that in public. Just mention it in passing. Because I'm broadcasting live, or as live as can be, from Victoria, British Columbia, what we might call the corridors of power. And I spent yesterday afternoon listening at keyholes, chattering up the boys in the back rooms to find out if anything is happening in the government of Victoria this year. You heard Mr. Bennett yesterday morning. One of the points Mr. Bennett made yesterday morning, that he was 99.9% in agreement with his most outspoken backbencher, Jack Davis. Jack Davis, as you well know, is a man who is making a remarkable comeback in provincial politics and may well be the man who supplies that jab of conscience to what can be a very soporific government majority. I'm just building up, Jack, for a jab after the break. Possibly the most sensitive and disruptive national issue, of course, is Quebec. Jack Davis was a federal cabinet minister at one time. He was environment, fisheries, and forestry in Ottawa. Is that not correct?
That's right.
And later you were energy, transportation, and communications in British Columbia.
Right.
I want to quote out of context part of a letter you wrote to an editor, which many people would think make you a Western person with very definite thinking. I'm not going to say separatist. We Westerners could live with a separate Quebec. Is that not a clear indication to the kind of fringe elements that a person of your knowledge and influence might well be heading in the direction of a Canada without Quebec?
Well, Jack, you've only read part of the sentence, but first, I'm a Canadian and I'm for one Canada. I'm for less power at the centre. I'm for decentralization. The alternatives which some people are presenting to us as the only two alternatives are Lévesque on the one hand and Claude Ryan on the other. Separation on the one hand, or an Ottawa dominated by Quebec on the other, and I don't want any part of either of them.
All right, just a minute though. What do you want though? I mean, you don't want the confused federalism of Claude Ryan.
That's right.
So therefore, perhaps you are giving aid and comfort to people who say, the hell with them. We're sick and tired of the referendum. We're sick and tired of being told that many federalists will vote yes in the referendum in June just to give Quebec under Lévesque or under Ryan better bargaining power.
Yeah. Well, I think they're both trying to show the electorate in Quebec that they will be tough bargainers for Quebec. Now, we mustn't be led into believing that inevitably they're going to get everything they ask.
Well, have we got a national leader now in this country who can cope with Quebec?
I think Pierre Trudeau can cope with Quebec. I'm not very happy with the bill that he brought in 2 years ago, which was to deal with the powers of the provinces versus the powers of the federal government. We've trended towards confusion, more and more confusion and overlapping between Ottawa and the provinces. In my view, we should sort it out, give Ottawa limited powers that make us a nation, and give the rest to the provinces.
Well, you take the situation now in Western Canada with the somewhat tough and somewhat arrogant Lougheed. And Mr. Bennett, perhaps, with his energy resources, hanging on to Mr. Lougheed's coattails. Are they not, in fact, as big a danger to national unity as a confused Ryan with his federal decentralization?
Not really. I'm sure that were Quebec or Ryan, for example, in Mr. Lougheed's position, he'd be asking for as much or more. We've got some strong regions in this province, in this country. This has been Canada's basic problem, a long stretched out country with 5 distinct regions. I think we should recognize this more in our Constitution. But Ottawa has to have certain essential powers, dealing with foreign relations, obviously, which includes defense, including foreign trade. Certainly money and banking. We must have one currency. We must have free trade totally in Canada. People, goods, services, capital must be able to move freely. If we've got all those things, plus perhaps some long-distance transportation like Air Canada and the CNR and CPR and so on, we've got a nation. The rest, the people program, should be provincial, and resources in the main should be resources for each province to administer.
But if you have the people programs provincial, surely to goodness you would not get a level standard of benefits across the country, be it in Medicare or health care. And yet, even that, if you gave decentralization to people programs across the country, you'd have 10 different levels of standards. And people moving about to the wealthy places and deserting and having to subsidize the non-wealthy places.
Yes, but the 5 regions, or the principal provinces anyway, can agree on certain programs which are national. They agreed, for example, on unemployment insurance being run from Ottawa. For good or ill, it's run from Ottawa.
Right.
And I think there'll always be a measure of agreement as to something called equalization.
Payments.
Payments, the central government, the national government taxing everybody, paying the provinces enough so that the provincial budgets will look after basic education, basic health, basic welfare. That kind of program would be permitted for the centre, but permitted willfully by the province.
Well, just looking at it very bluntly, you're reading your full letter, which caused a little stir. Yeah. You don't opt for the confused federalism of Mr. Ryan with his federal council, which would emasculate the federal government.
Well, he'd have a federal council which is made up totally, really, of provincial premiers, with no feds present at all. I mean, it's worse than a federal-provincial conference. It wouldn't agree on much. It certainly wouldn't agree, for example, on oil prices, but it would be blocking many national initiatives. I think the worst aspect of this is that, of Mr. Ryan's proposal anyway, is he wants Ottawa to continue to have all the taxing powers it has. He sees Ottawa as a tax gatherer, but he would administer the federal gathering of taxes, he and a few other premiers, spreading the money across the country.
That's not democracy.
No, it's not responsible government, and it also means the executive, one stage removed, has even more power than before. Cabinets are too powerful now. Premiers and prime ministers are too powerful. If you elect people to a provincial capital and they end up running the country, they're not even running on platforms which they're enacting.
Well, that was done backdoor in all the federal provincial conferences before, even the first ministers and second ministers, wasn't it?
I think that's the disturbing aspect of federal provincial conferences, that people who aren't elected on those issues, in fact, administer the issues.
Back to where we started, and you'll probably just dodge this completely. You did say we Westerners could live with a separate Quebec. What will happen if we have to live with a separate Quebec?
I said we can live with it.
No, but how do you see
that isn't
Canada?
the whole sentence. I say preferable to this other confused separatism. We would be better friends with Quebecers if they were totally separate than if they appear to us to be dominating us and confusing us all the time. The one relationship which is bad would be better than the other relationship which is worse.
Well,
Levesque, in my view, if you have to take Claude Ryan seriously, is better than Claude Ryan. Claude Ryan is trying to get a bargaining position. God forbid he ever gets all the things he's asking for.
Yeah, but the fact is, how would Canada look with a separate Quebec, said Webster, insisting on...
Well, it'd look like Pakistan and India. It wouldn't be good.
It would be bad.
It would be bad.
Anyway, British Columbia would never separate. There is no feeling here, is there?
I think British Columbians basically are Canadians, but they want to have a lot more say in their own affairs.
I want you to have some say in our affairs, too. As an independent social credit backbencher, free to speak after the break. Jack Davis, social credit, M.L.A. I don't go for the speculation that you would now or would cross the floor of the House from social credit?
Well, if crossing the floor means joining the N.D.P, there's not a chance.
If crossing the floor meant sitting as an independent because of your unhappiness with social credit policies, is that one of your options?
Well, it's an option, but it's certainly not very likely because I agree with the great majority of the policies. And I'm convinced also that those I don't like, I can help influence and steer back onto a course I like. So why would I leave the party?
Would you not have more influence if you sat as an independent in the House?
I don't think so. Independents don't have anyone to talk to. Independents are on their own, really. And I'm basically a team player. I'd much rather work with a team and certainly disagree, and disagree often in private and occasionally in public. You have that luxury of disagreeing in public if you're not in the cabinet. If you're in the cabinet, you have to be right on line all the time.
The budget. Mr. Bennett and Mr. Curtis are extraordinarily proud of their budget. Are you proud of your budget? Do you think it's a bad budget?
Yeah. I think basically it's a good budget, and now after Mr. Curtis spoke last night, it's an amended budget, and it's improved with the amendments.
Oh, just let's stop there for a moment. The last I heard of the budget was that the opposition were claiming a $900 million irresponsible surplus due to the usual old social credit caper of overestimating expenditures and underestimating revenues. Yeah. Bennett and Curtis agreed to $606 million surplus. Has Curtis changed his mind on the surplus? What are you talking about?
Well, first of all, the surplus. It's a windfall, if you like, particularly the natural gas revenues. We got that much increased border price. The Americans are paying a lot more, so suddenly we've got a lot more money flowing into the provincial treasury. It isn't the kind of income increase that you can expect year after year, but it certainly put the province in a very healthy financial position.
What do you say Curtis is going to do with it now?
Well, my criticism of the use of the surplus was that more of it should have been given back to the people in a tax cut. Now, I gather the policy is to put a good part of it into an ongoing, call it resource fund. It's really an equalization fund. We may not get this kind of windfall every year, so it'll be on an ongoing, rolling basis.
In other words, you're glad to see Curtis step back from the profligate...
From spending it.
Is it a profligate budget at the moment?
No, it isn't. The way it is now is that a small part of it is given, of the surplus is given back as a tax cut. I would like to have seen more.
What taxes would you have cut?
Well, I'd have cut the corporation tax. We've got the highest tax on companies, the general corporation tax. Ours is the highest in Canada. It's 15%. I'd have cut it to, say, 12, which is a level which several other provinces have, including Ontario.
What else?
I think that was important. And we could have cut our personal income tax another 2 points. Which would have meant a little more for people to spend rather than government to spend. Now but I'm all for having a surplus in exceptional income years and putting part of that into a stabilization fund, call it a resource
heritage fund, if you like.
Yes, and in the leaner years it's available. So there should be a flywheel kind of effect there, and so I'm all for this, this kind of policy. What Mr. Curtis really said last night is that they weren't going to spend as much.
Taking fright.
As he was implying they would spend a week ago when he brought his budget in.
But as a man of small L liberal principles, I can't call you a capital L liberal because you remember the social credit.
Yes.
Right? Surely you're shamefaced about their pathetic move towards housing when we have zero vacancy rates and mortgage crises, you know, over the tops of everybody's heads.
Well, traditionally, the federal government has been most effective in this area, but the provinces have to move in. The BC government did with that $200 million program.
It wasn't really $200 million, or was it?
Well, it was $200 million worth of loans. Lending that money for 3 years at a reduced interest rate gets some additional construction underway. Mm-hmm. And it's the kind of program which I believe should be expanded. But that's a lending program, and after the end of 3 years, for example, the money is back in the Treasury.
Do you believe there is a real housing mortgage crisis now?
Well, there's got to be a mortgage crisis with interest rates at 15% or higher.
If you were in power, you might say, would you not use that whole of the $200 million as a mortgage subsidy plan, an interest subsidy plan, which would have really given a shot in the arm to construction?
Well, I think the government, having made a start, could easily expand its program. It's $200 million lent at 4 or 5% below the market rate. So the real cost is only 4 or 5% of 200 million. It's a relatively small number, like 10 million a year. And clearly a government with a surplus of 5, 6, 700 million can do more in that direction. But it's happily in that position.
Anyway, you think perhaps Curtis has been listening to some of your criticisms?
Yes, I think pleading from within but doing it publicly in the legislature has helped.
You can do something else publicly for me, Mr. Davis. You were the ferry minister.
Yes.
Would you have let this botch-up happen with the Prince Rupert off for 2 months, Art Elworthy being bounced, Gallagher now being apparently appointing a new chairman, and the whole Marguerite service down the tube? Can you tell me, you know the facts and figures in that, what happened?
Well, it goes back quite a long way. When the N.D.P. took over the old CPR run from Seattle to Victoria, it took over a losing proposition. It took over an old vessel. And we've got a problem. We have to decide what we're going to do about that longer run. We either have to buy a big new vessel or have one built, which will even be more expensive, or refurbish the old Marguerite at quite some expense. That was one decision which was going to come on the government because it decided to continue that service. The other problem is the service up north, which in good part is a tourist service, Port Hardy to Rupert. I wouldn't have put as many tax dollars into that losing run as is currently being done.
Yeah, but how come they can desert the Rupert service for 8 weeks?
Well,
you were the guy who arranged the $8 million subsidy too, as I recall, for northern transportation.
Federal government
money into BC.
Yeah. Well, obviously decisions should have been made a year ago rather than this spring.
Bad management, therefore.
Yes.
We're into the Queen of Surrey now. For how much money? The N.D.P. bought it for 18 million. Couldn't flog it for half price. You tried to sell it for half price.
Well, we couldn't get more than 5 or 6 million for it, so we didn't sell it. Now it's being refurbished at a cost of nearly 8 million.
That brings it up to 23 or thereabouts.
And then the docks, so that it can dock at Port Hardy and Prince Rupert, will cost another 6 or 7 million.
We're up to 30 million now.
Well, the only thing I can say with some consolation, if we had to buy a new vessel and do it from scratch, it'd cost 30 or 40 million. So, okay. But I certainly wouldn't have modified the Surrey as expensively as they're modifying it.
You'd have used the Surrey on the Victoria run. It was built for that kind of trip.
Yes, that's right. If we were merely trying to save money, we should have put the Surrey on the Seattle to Victoria run and continued to use the not-so-old Queen of Prince Rupert on the run for which it was built, Port Hardy to Rupert.
Seems a shame to send the old Marguerite to the records if that's what's going to happen.
Well, I'd like to see one alternative explored, and that is taking out her old energy-wasteful steam-electric drive and putting in diesel engines. And the vessel is, the hull is sound, the superstructure is sound. It needs to be rewired. The wiring's 30-odd years old, and some new plumbing and a new kitchen. And then you've got a heritage vessel with modern engines, can maintain its high speed, all its appearance. It's got a lot of passenger carrying capacity, up to 2,000. And so have a heritage vessel like the Hudson, running for the next 20 years with modern engines.
The Hudson, you know what they did to the Hudson. You know how they followed up its American trip. Your people.
Yeah.
I'll ask Grace
I thought it was a successful trip.
No, they followed it up this year.
Yeah. Oh, this year.
Anyway, there's one reason we've got to keep the Marguerite.
Yeah.
You haven't thought about.
Yeah.
She and I both came from Scotland in the same year.
Really?
Yeah.
Really? Well, I'll try and flog that idea.
Jack Davis, you're in good form these days.
Yes.
Do you predict a bright political future for yourself within social credit?
A useful one, yep.
Back the cabinet.
No, well, I'm enjoying my present role.
But you'd accept the cabinet position at any time?
Not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Jack Davis, North Vancouver, Capilano?
Seymour.
North Vancouver-Seymour. Next, two fellows from the N.D.P. Charlie Barber from Victoria and Stu Leggatt, another ex-Ottawa man from New Westminster, after the break. It's no secret that my two N.D.P. guests now are two of the quickest lips in the house in Victoria. Leggatt, Stu Leggatt, of course, is really from Coquitlam-Moody. I just said New Westminster just to annoy everybody in New Westminster. And Charles Barber, of course, who's been very much in the forefront. You haven't been in the House that long, have you, Mr. Barber?
No, first elected in '75.
Do you find yourself in broad agreement with what your friend from across the floor, Mr. Davis, said about the government's botch-up of the Marguerite?
Yes, I think he's correct in fact, and he's correct in conclusion as well. They have mishandled it, and the better decisions would have been to keep the Rupert where it belongs, to admit that the Marguerite is in fact mechanically safe, as Mr. Davis has clearly said, and to be prepared to reinvest in her because of the unique character and the unique charm of that vessel.
Who was to blame? Alec Fraser? Art Elworthy? Uncle Tom Cobley? Bill Bennett? Put the blame on somebody.
Well, the person I think who has to carry the can more than anyone else is the man who is named by the Premier to reconcile the conflict between Mr. Phillips and Mr. Fraser, and that's Hugh Curtis. Hugh Curtis recommended the Rupert. Hugh Curtis pushed that recommendation through Cabinet, as we're informed. Hugh Curtis, in fact, now to his embarrassment, but at that time to his his apparent pleasure, announced the decision publicly for the first time on January 31st of this year. So if anyone symbolically it can be held responsible for a whole government's decision, it's Mr. Curtis, who clearly was ill-advised and didn't think through the implications of what he was announcing.
Well, he's now finance minister.
That's right.
Carried a very heavy portfolio and delivered a brilliant budget, did he not?
He delivered a very large budget, he certainly did.
Well, how lackluster was it?
It's really kind of funny, isn't it? When Dave Barrett brought in his first budget in 1976, what was the term he gave it? A Robin Hood budget, eh? Mm-hmm. And of course the government roundly attacked it for being inflationary, for being wasteful, for expending too much of the province's resources. Now the Social Credit has done, as far as the total expenditures go, much the same thing, a sudden increase in public spending. Of course, they now think that's perfectly responsible and prudent, and we say there's something wrong with it. A general comment on politics in British Columbia.
Housing. You have no high crises in Coquitlam-Moody and housing.
Terrible crisis. We have one of the worst crises in the Lower Mainland. It's the same situation as Vancouver. I think we're about a zero vacancy rate. No question that this budget hasn't addressed the problem of housing at all. I know earlier you were discussing it with Jack Davis, and I think Jack would, in his quiet moments, admit that this has really ignored the major crisis in British Columbia, which is clearly interest rates and housing.
But at the same time, to go to the... I think you're more of a doctrinaire socialist than Stuart is.
Me? Oh,
yes.
Gosh, no.
You're not?
No.
I mean, the N.D.P. with all its bitty little things like co-op housing and a little bit of this and a little bit of that, that's not the kind of program that's going to solve the housing crisis today, is it?
That's correct. It's not broadly enough based. Co-op housing is important. Seniors housing is necessary.
Right.
One by one, those are good things. All in all, they're not enough.
Vacancy in Victoria?
Virtually zero.
That bad in
That's
Victoria?
right, yeah.
So many civil servants, of course. Oh, that's part of the reason, isn't it?
Well, it's the principal fixed income that Victoria has.
And retirees?
Yeah.
All right, tell me the Barber plan, if not necessarily the N.D.P. plan, for housing in Victoria.
Government has to have a role, in our opinion. And that's not doctrinaire, it's just common sense, and it's a role which every other government in Canada has adopted and agreed to. That's the notion of a housing corporation or something like it, which can, in a quick and thoughtful way, become involved in the housing market, either through the provision of land, through the provision of serviced land, or sometimes through actual construction in certain fields, again like seniors housing, make up the gap where private enterprise simply cannot or will not do the job.
Surely interest rates is the only answer to housing. If you subsidize mortgage rates, houses will be built.
Yes, if you can find the land to put it on as well. The notion of making more Crown land available for those purposes, public and private, is also really important. Mr. Chabot, you'll recall, made a grand announcement a year and a half ago. What have you seen of it since?
548 lots sold in small quantities throughout the whole province.
It's pathetic.
And you can't get them on the air to explain it.
It's absolutely pathetic. It's a zero consequence.
And the interesting thing is that in the minuscule program they've announced, which is small, $200 million into the mortgage market is peanuts, the actual cost to the taxpayer of that program is only $8 million a year. All it would have cost out of that billion-dollar surplus would be $8 million for the present program. If they wanted to make it $1 billion, it would cost them $40 million. Now, I think all across British Columbia people would be very happy to see $40 million out of this surplus go to a $1 billion housing program at 9 3/4%. Then you start to tackle the program.
Now you're talking common sense.
Yeah.
But I've got another one for common sense.
Okay.
What would you say to my proposition that the government of the province of British Columbia, whichever it happens to be at any given time, merely said, any home capable of sustaining 2 families in proper health conditions, be it in West Van, North Van, Shaughnessy, Gordon Head, anywhere, any of your fancy districts here, arbitrarily impose duplex zoning and all suitable accommodation throughout British Columbia. Would that not be a big answer?
What would be the practical result of it?
It means that all the empty houses will be divided into two in the big,
Oh.
lush houses.
Why worry about it as a duplex? Just allow in-suite plumbing, en-suite, same thing. This is what you're getting at. Okay, I think you're right.
Legalize all illegal suites that meet standards and allow people with big houses to put a suite in.
Now, there's
The
another...
Vancouver specials you're referring to.
There's another good reason for that, Jack, and that is to remove pressure from the agricultural land reserve. What we do is if we'll use the housing stock we have more intensively, you also come to grips with the problem, which means that municipalities have got to get their act together and stop this sort of holier-than-thou attitude around zoning, which is, you know, we've got to protect the wealthy sections of town.
Right.
You know, that kind of nonsense has to end when you've got a zero vacancy rate and no
Stuart
place
has said it better than I have. Give authority in all suitable accommodation to put in additional suites, and then you have no extra fire, no extra police, no extra schools.
Yep.
Might give you 10,000 units in a year.
Yeah.
The Municipal Act virtually grants such authority now. Why don't they do it? Probably because, again, as Stuart has hinted, the kind of neighborhood pressure, the community pressure, the neighborhood revolt against that kind of invasion of sometimes an unwelcome population. I'm not sure that the change in law is required so much as, if the community wants it, the change in attitude that would use the law, which is already adequate.
Finally, Bill Vander Zalm's on next. He'll know the answer. Won't
Bill
he?
probably has some ideas on that. But a lot of it is a lack of leadership at the provincial level. Remember that the style of government comes from the top, and they should be promoting, the minister, I hope, will address himself to promoting those en-suite situations throughout the province. And he can provide the leadership.
Is this your first session in Victoria?
No,
Second.
I was short session. We had only 40 days last year. Yeah.
Having seen the corridor scrums and the foul language used in the corridor by people from both sides of the House,
Yes.
do you kind of keep it a secret that you sit in Victoria?
No, as a matter of fact, I have a bill presently, I hope that'll be called for second reading, where it won't be a secret. We'll have the proceedings televised throughout British Columbia so that every home in British Columbia can watch this if they want. Now, I think we'll, A, clean up our act.
Might lead to revolution.
But B, what's more important is that maybe those in outlying areas will have more attention paid to their problems. Because if we know in Victoria that someone in Pouce Coupé is watching that television screen and watching what's happened, we'll start to deal more with their problems. See, I happen to think that British Columbia is too centralized in the Lower Mainland. You know, there's not enough attention being paid to the, even though I'm a Lower Mainland M.L.A., I believe that in the north, we're ignoring that whole hinterland because of the media is here, the attention is always in the Lower Mainland. I know your program goes all the way up to throughout the province.
Your point is taken. I was in the House yesterday afternoon. I forget who was speaking. Who was speaking yesterday?
Bill King spoke for us.
Bill King. There were about 6 people on the government side of the House and maybe 12 people on the N.D.P. side of the House, right?
Yeah.
And it's just going through a routine formula. If you had television coverage,
Much
they'd
better.
all be sitting there bright and alert, and there'd be no nose picking or falling asleep.
Absolutely, yeah. We cut down the physical combat quite a bit.
Want to talk to you about freedom of speech and immunity in the House and where and when it should be properly used. And to Charles Barber, Stu Leggatt, N.D.P. Victoria, N.D.P. Coquitlam-Port Moody, after this commercial break. When the Farris crisis first broke, more than a year ago, only 2 lawyers in Canada would talk to me on the air about the implications of it. One was John Fraser, a Tory MP from Ottawa, and the other was Stu Leggatt, an N.D.P. MP from Ottawa at that particular time. I don't want to rehash the whole business, Mr. Leggatt, but do you think that the government, or the Alan Williams, a man for whom you probably have a fair amount of respect as a lawyer, do you think that he has handled the Vogel affair properly, and lawsuits aside on private problems? Do you think that responsible members of the media and politicians like yourself should now drop the whole business?
No. I don't think you can blame Alan Williams entirely. I think the responsibility has to be shared with his predecessor, Gardy Gardam, and again, both very able and honorable people. The problem is that they've forgotten the political reality of the Farris question. You'd have to be on Mars not to know that every coffee shop and so on, this was the major subject. What really happened around the Farris question? Now, there has been enough specifics raised, not merely by the CBC story, but specifics surrounding the Wendy King case and now the Moran case and the Rigg case to call for an independent judicial inquiry, not an in-house inquiry. You know, I realize the Attorney General has a certain responsibility, but he can't fulfill it in the public way. You see, he's got to have the public satisfied that this matter has been completely cleared. Now, you can't do that with an in-house inquiry, an inquiry which doesn't disclose what the witnesses said, no one giving evidence under oath. You can't expect the public to accept it. And the only real answer is to clear Mr. Vogel, is with a full judicial inquiry. Remember, I called for the inquiry around the Seaton matter. Remember, that was the Judge Govan case. The reason for calling a judge in that case was the same basic reason as this case. We wanted to be satisfied that justice was being done, but it just didn't appear to be done.
The Seaton case wasn't an open inquiry.
Yes, it was.
It was an open inquiry with evidence on oath.
A public inquiry, evidence on oath, and an excellent report.
And transcripts available of everything that happened.
Transcripts available of what happened. The participants testified in front of Judge Seaton. And he produced a report that has advanced the cause of justice in British Columbia. I think the same thing could happen around the Vogel matter. I think that it could very well result in the clearing of Dick Vogel. And I think he should welcome that kind of
In other words,
inquiry.
you say...
But certainly I think the Attorney General has a duty as a result of his office, and a duty to the public of British Columbia to have that inquiry.
The allegations of interference in 3 particular cases, one of which centered around subpoenas in the Farris case, you say cannot be put to bed until a Supreme Court judge is appointed, despite the Williams investigation.
Yes.
And the matter examined in public on oath, transcript available, and witnesses with anything pertinent be called or allowed to come forward.
Yes.
I'm thinking of the Justice Council people up
Yes.
in the Moran case who are apparently very unhappy still about not being questioned by the Williams inquiry.
Right. Whether they would be appropriate witnesses, I don't know, because I don't know what their personal knowledge is around that particular question.
It was you people who set up the Justice Councils to give the local people input into the handling of the law.
The very purpose of the Justice Councils was to demonstrate that the law isn't just for lawyers and judges. We're administering the law for the people of British Columbia, and they have to be satisfied that there's no favoritism. They have to be satisfied that my client who's got impaired driving is going to be treated on the same basis that anyone else, and it doesn't matter who you know. And I think, and again, I'm not suggesting that wasn't the case in regard to the 3 allegations in the CBC program, but I am suggesting that the answer for the Attorney General has always been staring him in the face, and I think he should take the opportunity now to call a Supreme Court judge to have a full inquiry.
Mr. Barber, you, I hope, are not a lawyer.
I'm not a lawyer, and I'm darn proud of the fact.
Yes, a matter of
No, lawyers
With all respect to my friends, Stu.
Come on,
Well, you must confess, though, I mean, all current issues apart, that the legal profession has a tendency to look after its own.
They have a tendency to pull the wagons in a circle every
You
once
have
in
a
while.
closed shop trade union, you administer your own discipline, you expel and introduce people into your profession without any member of the public being involved.
Correct. In fact, I believe there should be a layperson appointed to the benches of the Law Society.
Or
I've long
2 or
believed
3.
that. Or 2 or 3.
Or 2 or 3.
Would you suggest that he's got time this session, Charles, to introduce such a private
I
member's
have
bill?
such a private member's bill, Charles. It's presently in the works.
It's going the rounds in caucus at the moment, and it's before the committee.
Do you think the administration of justice, and I'm broadening the whole scope now, to alcoholic judges, I hate doing this, but somebody's got to talk about it. I said during the Farris case, if you don't get up and fight this one, you give in totally to the establishment. Do you think that the public cares at this moment? Is the public concerned about the administration of justice on a broad level?
No. In my opinion, not anywhere near as much as they should be. I agree very much with Stu that in regard to Mr. Williams' handling of the Vogel case, no one, probably even including Mr. Williams at heart, is in fact satisfied, because the self-interest of the government is too largely at stake. It has to be public, it has to be judicial, it has to be separate from politics.
They can't back down on that now, though, can they?
Well, you know, people are always, I think, sufficiently good-hearted and fair-minded enough to allow anyone to say, standing up in public, you know, I've thought about it, I agree. I'm going to give it a second chance. Take the famous second look that the old man used to. We're going to do it another way. People are always willing to admire and respect someone who has the guts to stand up and say, maybe you're right, maybe I wasn't, let's try it this way, because I, like yourself, want to be satisfied that it was done correctly.
Seemed to be done.
I think Mr. Williams would receive tremendous public credit if he did
there's
that.
a terrible conflict of interest in the Attorney General's role. He has a duty, A, to represent his government. He also has a duty as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer. Sometimes those two roles come into conflict, and it's exactly that situation where he should call on outside, independent, full inquiry.
Except, of course, I suppose people will say, ah, it's just lawyers fighting.
No, it's a more important issue than that. I'm not sure I agree with Charles on that. I think there's a very high interest in members of the public, particularly who aren't in the legal profession, to know that when I get into trouble, I'm going to be treated the same as anyone else.
Well, you see, this is another thing where Charles and I will probably disagree violently with you. The appointment of judges is sacrosanct, correct? Once a man's a judge, he's got that lifetime tenure and security and whatnot. If we come across, as we have done, I'm talking about provincial courts, judges who misbehave, can't we fire them?
Well,
is it impossible to fire a judge?
It was the New Democratic Party government that provided the kind of inquiry process that Judge Benrot went through. Judge Benrot has a high reputation on the bench. He continues to be providing a very good service to the people of British Columbia. And the process is so different than if you look at the Farris instance that again...
Hold on, you've missed the point, Stu. We're talking about Judge XYZ now, who appears tomorrow, and on the odds, more will appear. And he is subject of a public inquiry. At the moment, he can't be fired under the Provincial Judges Judicial Council Act.
I'm not so sure that I would want my judges, the judges of the province, to be subject to the whim of any particular political figure and be fired. In other words, what you're asking for is political control over the bench, and that's never been a tradition in our democracy. We look for independence.
Barber, appointments of judges have traditionally been political appointments in this country.
There has been a political element. You can't castigate every judge that's sitting on the bench in that way. Very excellent people.
I can tell you the politics of every judge sitting in the higher courts under which regime he was appointed, with some exceptions in later years.
I will agree with you that the process has to be changed, but I won't agree with you that they should have no tenure. I think it's vital to the system. You're right, you may be right about the appointment system, Jack, but you're not right in terms of the independence of the judiciary. It's absolutely vital that your civil liberties have to be in the hands of someone who can't be fired at the whim of a political person.
You can remove a Supreme Court judge from office by some kind of message in Parliament.
That's right. You can do it with a bill in the House.
Why can't you do the same for provincial judges?
I think they can be removed by the Judicial Council. I could be wrong. My recollection is that the Judicial Council can recommend. Well, you're probably right. I'm not going to challenge his legal expertise.
There's no machinery to dispose of judges who are totally unsatisfactory.
Why shouldn't we establish for judges, as some would have us do for lawyers, if it's to be self-governing, let the public have a say. Let there be lay representation on, if you will, a council of judges, the point and purpose of which would be to supervise what happens to judges who have a stroke and lose a mental capacity, go senile,
I have no problem
develop a problem with alcohol or whatever.
I don't want this.
Another private member's bill.
All right, but what I'm worried
about... Give
the
judges control.
You are in the direction of giving control over judges to the Attorney General, and that's exactly the reason I raised the Govan case.
Right at the moment, if you want a job...
I do not want interference from the Attorney General with judges.
Right at the moment, if you want a job as a provincial judge, you apply for it.
Yeah.
It's a hell of a way to pick judges, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I think that whole application thing should change. Judges should be picked in a different way.
I think we've outvoted him. And I think we've agreed that there should be a method of discipline or disposal controlled by his peers, judges, with public representation.
Self-discipline and self-government is a good thing, and it's one of the protections in a delicate system, be it law or medicine, that people have got to look for. And I agree very much with Stu. You don't want attorneys general meddling for political reasons in the administration. But the public also, and not just the judges by themselves, have got a role in there. They've got to be heard.
Time. One more short segment on other topics with Mr. Barber and Mr. Leggatt, isn't it?
Yes, that's right. Got it right again.
You know that. When the Heroin Treatment Act was introduced with the compulsory aspects of the bill by Bob McClellan, who at the time was the Minister of Health, the first question I put to him on that occasion was, if this is a flop, will you scrap the whole, it was then a $15 million program? He said, yes. Well, the program self-destructed.
Yeah.
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 You have some knowledge of this. And
Well,
some...
it's interesting because when I was a federal member of parliament, we all do a lot of work with regard to prisoners in the federal penitentiaries, and I'm still getting mail right across the country from ex-addicts inside saying, I've seen the light now and I'm going to cure my habit if you'll only get me into Brandon Lake. You know, that's all they need is a chance to get over there, and they'll never take another another fix in their whole life. Now, I don't happen to believe it, but it's interesting that Brandon Lake has a reputation as a health spa rather than a place where you can really kick your habit, because it's pretty clear there's a con going on right across the country now in regard to Brandon Lake.
Well, I wished him the best of luck. It didn't work out. But something I'm out of touch with now, Charles, and you belong to the newer generation. Yes. Are the drugs in the schools and the drugs in social use as heavy as I'm told by the rounders on House Street and whatnot? And I'm told by the police, apparently, who now want undercover men who can pass for the age of 12 so they can get into the LSD and the pot rackets in the schools. How bad is it? You used to be very knowledgeable in this area.
I was a member of the Alcohol and Drug Commission, and together with Stu and others, recognized long in advance that the Heroin Treatment Program was a joke and would not work. It had been tried elsewhere in North America and couldn't work. Regarding the problem, I don't know much more about it than what I know in Victoria, but I've had calls from time to time down at my community office from the mothers or fathers of kids in elementary school. In fact, I know quite intimately the mother of one child who's at a local elementary school here and has been offered marijuana on the school grounds by a kid in the year ahead. Whether or not they quite know what they're doing, I don't know. But certainly, there's commerce in it. Certainly, the usual ethic prevails. If there's a buck to be made, someone will make it. And why not? Elementary school kids, junior high kids, they have the use of it too.
Do we just accept this in communities now with a kind of permissive attitude as long as it's apparently non-damaging and let it wither on the vine, hopefully, in the future?
I believe it's starting to wither now. I'm not sure that I agree with your assessment that it's higher. I seem to have fewer complaints about drugs in our school system than I had 5 or 6 years ago. I used to be chairman of the school board for 9 years, or for several years, and I was on the board for 9 years. I think it was a worse problem than it was now. I detect it's less of an in thing. Drug abuse is less of an in thing for young people. I think there has been a straightening out. Now, it's slow, but it's coming. I don't have any magic solutions. I've never found anybody who really had magic solutions to this thing, you know.
I've always been on the shrill side of the scale, and maybe I'm thinking it maybe time to kind of just cool it.
I'm pessimistic about it, Jack, because when I went through the prison system, you know, we did a very intensive study of the prison system right across Canada. I never met a drug addict who really wasn't going to fix up the first time he got out of prison. You know, that was the reality of the place, because it's their #1 priority. They've replaced everything else in their life with that. Now, internally, they have to change. It's almost a feeling of guilt. There has to be some internal reformation. No one has a magic solution. No one at all.
There's nothing, you're not negative enough for me on that, so let me put this to Charles. A number of people on the outside looking at Bennett say that he's a man alone, a man friendless within his cabinet, that the Liberals on board may jump the ship one day. What kind of feeling do you get about the stability of social credit on the other side of the House?
I'd be very surprised if any member of the coalition left it. They paid much too great a price to get in. They would have to pay an even greater price to get out, and I don't think they'll do that in their personal terms or in the terms of their career either. But I do think that Mr. Bennett has enormously suffered in the last 8-9 months since the scandal started. He's suffered in stature and credibility. Certainly his ability, as we can see it even on the floor of the House. You know, you're there for a few years, you learn to read the faces. You know who sits with who at lunch, you know who sits with who on the floor yakking late into the night as friends. You know who's excluded. The Premier seems not to command, as far as we can tell, the basic affection or goodwill any longer of many of his colleagues. Not all, and I'm sure, for instance, Mrs. McCarthy still gets along with him really quite well. But the basic affection and goodwill that a political leader has to have, I don't think Mr. Bennett has maintained that. The political respect that he holds, well, of course, he still names the cabinet and he's got all that authority, but it's really hurt him very, very badly in the last several months. No doubt about that at all. Not a single person.
You people have been criticized quite strongly for your poor performance during question period. I'm thinking of Todd and Turnbull in the province and a couple of other people, Gar also.
They said Charles and I did well.
Did you muff the dirty tricks follow-up?
No. Look, I think the press is an exaggerated idea of what question period can accomplish. I spent 7 years in question period in Ottawa, and it's really quite new to
With
this
the big
place.
boys.
It's the big time. No.
That'll annoy everybody.
I know. No. I'm being facetious here, Jack. But, you know, in terms of our question period performance, A, the rules are different. You can't get rhetorical. The questions tend to be dull because they have to be specific. You can't go into a long rhetorical explanation of your question. Basically, I think the question period has been sound. I just think somebody should watch the cabinet during question period, and you'll find out whether it's affected by the expressions on the faces of the front row.
Let me add to that for a minute. The press, you know, you guys got it easy. You can grab them any old time. You have no rules to follow. You have no speaker to ask permission of. You can chase them down the hall if you don't get an answer. We are severely limited by the rules of question period, and to compare our ability to extract information to that of the press when we have to play by different rules isn't entirely fair.
And Gary Locke has done just a super job around question period, by the way. It's organized down to a T, and it's looking good.
How has Vander Zalm performed this time? He's on next. Anything I can really jab him with? Why has he been so quiet?
That's right.
Well, he's a very charming fellow.
But he's been absolutely dead quiet.
He's a bright and charming guy who wants to be premier and who made some mistakes in his first term and was told to shut up and stop making other ministers announcements. So he shut up, he stopped making announcements, and he's tending his own turf.
He's been muzzled.
One would think so.
We'll ask him. He's next up.
He's been pretty cool lately.
My thanks to Stu Leggatt, N.D.P. Coquitlam-Moody, Charles Barber, Victoria, and Bill Vander Zalm, Minister of Municipal Affairs, after this commercial break. Bill Vander Zalm, one of the, he hates the term, most colourful politicians, not so stupid at that either. Bill Vander Zalm, Minister of Municipal Affairs. You heard what, I like this studio on Czech TV.
Oh, this is great, I agree.
It seems to be kind of intimate, and you seem to get people going better, quickly.
And of course, it's very handy for us. We can get over here very quickly from the Parliament buildings.
That's right enough.
It helps out.
Did you hear what Barber and Leggatt said about you?
Yes, I did, yeah.
That you'd been muzzled?
Oh, I disagree completely,
you'd
but
been
I heard them
shut
say
up.
it. I heard them say
Well,
it.
tell me about yourself. What trouble have you got into lately?
No, I haven't been in any trouble. Really, I never was in all that much trouble, you know. I just had another portfolio, which was a whole lot more controversial. Human resources was a bit of a disaster each and every day. And they had to be resolved. So certainly I came out gangbusters. And actually, of course, it must be remembered that I took the attitude from the very beginning that what human resources needed more than anything was a change of attitude. And I was wanting to introduce attitudinal change by expressing concerns, by bringing matters to the fore.
You certainly
I think
did.
it worked well.
It certainly did. It was
Sure.
certainly very effective.
I think so.
Serious business.
Municipal affairs isn't quite that controversial, of course.
Could be.
Not quite.
What about this illegal suites? You get a city like Vancouver, which has got 16,000 illegal suites. Burnaby's got, I think it's about, 3,000 or 4,000 illegal suites. Why don't you, as Minister of Municipal Affairs, use your power and legalize all good accommodation to take the heat off the housing crisis?
Well, the illegal suites are there. Whether they're legal or illegal, they're being used. And no municipality is clamping down on those suites.
They
So
must if there's a
actually-
complaint. If you get a complaint, the inspector will be over, you'll go to court and get an order to get them out.
But really, I haven't heard of any number of suites being closed by any municipality. So the suites are being used. What you're really saying is there perhaps a potential there of developing further suites during a time of crisis.
Yes.
And I agree. And certainly that has been something the ministry has been considering now. We've wondered whether we couldn't perhaps develop a system of permitting, because really the concerns are from people in the community, and understandably too. Everybody says, well, there's a housing crisis, let's do something to resolve it. Don't do it in my neighborhood. Mine's a very nice street with Japanese plums and all the rest. I don't want all of these additional people, but somewhere down the road there must be a place for this. So that's one concern. And I suppose in part people have a reason or a cause to be concerned, because after all, they moved into a single family dwelling area. They knew what they were buying, and suddenly we impose something differently on them. And that isn't always cricket either, because what we're having to accommodate in British Columbia today is a tremendous influx of people. We are seeing in British Columbia the greatest growth on a per capita basis of any area in North America.
You mean immigration statistics?
We are getting more people from other parts of Canada, especially other parts of the world to some degree.
Any figures on it? Because I'm told that our population, the last time I saw a figure, BC's population went down a little bit.
No, we're seeing a movement in of approximately, on an average, 1,000 families per month. So we're establishing a small town each and every month of the year at the rate we're going now. We're the one place in North America, bar none. I've got visitors from California. They've been here for 3 days. They're amazed at the prosperity, at the activity, at what's happening in BC. People right across Canada are seeing the same thing. We perhaps in British Columbia, because we're so much a part of it and so close to the scene, aren't aware of that.
Yeah, but don't get away from the question. You're telling me 1,000 families a month moving into BC, 0 rental vacancies, as we well know, thousands of illegal suites. Do you plan to use your powers as Minister of Municipal Affairs to impose permitting over the heads of, say, a city council?
Let me preface it by this. The problem we face in British Columbia is because we're getting a tremendous influx of people. The problem we face in British Columbia is that the same problem doesn't exist back east, and a federal government is not aware of what's happening, or at least they're not prepared to respond to a situation in British Columbia. We are now in the ministry looking at permitting illegal or permitting suites, not illegal suites. Permitting would legalize them. Which would give us the ability to put a time limit on them, number one, and secondly, also, it would give the municipality some of the revenue they lose from a suite being occupied by a family in a home that doesn't pay any more taxes. So maybe there's a way of coming at it. I really can't say for sure it's the answer, but we're looking at it. We're aware of the problem. We're also very actively approaching it through a new planning act, a proposed planning act, where we want to take a whole lot of the red tape out of government, out of development. You know, the problems we face in British Columbia are not, as some would say, and I've heard it said this morning, because there isn't enough government intervention or enough of a government role in the provision of houses. It's too much of a government role. It goes right back to the days of rent controls. Now we are beginning to subsidize mortgages, and I agree, on a temporary basis, that's fine. If it becomes a government program, it's only another government intervention which somewhere down the road will lead to disaster. It's happened everywhere it's been tried.
Just let me get this. So you are actively considering now the possibility of setting up a permit system in areas which are not zoned for suites, single-family dwelling areas, RS1.
We are considering it. Let's underline considering. I don't know what all of the implications are as yet. I've asked the ministry to gather the information on it.
And that would, of course, give the municipalities or the cities extra revenue from the official knowledge of the suites.
That's correct. And also,
give
it
you
would
the
time
authority.
permit them. Now, the difficulties, obviously, for a part are that once you issue a permit, how do you then move the people out unless the housing situation changes drastically? So there is that problem.
Mind you, you are a man who's known to, as minister, you can ride roughshod over municipalities, as you did on the Annacis Island choice. The bridge at Annacis Island, against the wishes of the GVRD for the location of the bridge.
Well, you have to look at the GVRD for what it is.
What is it?
It's a group of
Tell me
municipalities dominated by Vancouver. And the bureaucrats in the GVRD, like so often happens in many regional districts, it happens in school boards, it happens at the municipal level, but it happens more so in a regional district. The bureaucrats take control. 3 days before Annacis Island was announced, even though it showed on their official plan as a crossing at Annacis and had done for a good many years, and again on their latest revised plan, which was only shown in Surrey the week previous. 3 days before the announcement of the Annacis, suddenly the bureaucrats, not the politician, come out and say, terrible choice, wrong thing, put it on Pattullo. I live near Pattullo Bridge. I don't know how we can squeeze any more traffic through that road leading to Pattullo Bridge. That's a disaster already. I agree the Pattullo Bridge will develop well into a potential crossing for transit, and I intend to work to that end, and I know it can be done. But don't let anybody tell you that every person suddenly is going to get out of their automobile. No way. We still need good roads. We still need further crossings. The world isn't going to stop all of a sudden and everybody's going to get on the bus, because the bus can't come to many homes. There's many areas in the Lower Mainland, especially when you get into the Surreys, the Langleys, the White Rocks, where you cannot provide bus service to every residential subdivision. You still need cars, unfortunately.
Frog in my oh, I said a frog in my throat.
I had the same
wasn't.
thing,
No, I wasn't trying to be funny. I wasn't trying to be funny. I wasn't making any crack.
No.
Although I'll make a crack after the break. I remember when Bill Vander Zalm was first appointed Municipal Affairs, he made it very clear he didn't like these regional districts and he was going to trim their wings. And you had them right now talking about the bureaucrats in the GVRD who created the phony row about the location of the Annacis Island Bridge. He said, not the politicians, the bureaucrats. 3 days before the announcement, they said no good, right?
That's correct.
Do you have any plans or legislation to clip the wings of this extra level of government which annoys and is expensive to many people?
Well, you know, there's a number of things that need to be done. Firstly...
Oh, can you stop for a minute? We want to check the phones out this morning. Do forgive me, Mr. Vander Zalm. To get on the phone today and tomorrow, you call the usual numbers in Vancouver. Linda is in Vancouver. Linda can put phone calls through to me. Even if you're in Victoria, you call the usual numbers, right? You can't dial a local number. Or if you're in Port Radium, call Collect. You know, in all these places. Forgive me.
No problem. First of all, there's...
We want to try the phones now.
Good. Right
See
now?
if they're working for tomorrow.
Okay.
You want to start again?
Well, as I said, firstly, there's the problem of the governmental process in the regional districts. A lot of people are upset because they feel that these people are not representative enough, that they really can't get through, that they're not expressing the wishes they want to see carried forth, and so there's that problem. The second problem is the sort of programs they're involved with. And no one would argue that it's good to have a regional authority for water, for sewer, for garbage disposal, and the likes of that, fire, and you name it, particularly in the northern communities where otherwise perhaps they have no local government at all. But the planning process is what I find bugs people more than anything. And that's the one area I want to approach first. Unlike perhaps the normal Bill Vander Zalm, I'm going very easy on this one. I'll take it in little bites. No, I've not been told to. No, as a matter of fact, sometimes when I'm told to do something, I tend to go faster the other way, and that's not, I'm not saying that's a strength, that might be a weakness. But no, I have not been told. I intend to deal with it as well as I can, but I really realize that I can't do it all in one bite.
Okay. Please don't baffle me with science and transit. Mr. Bennett did so yesterday. I know about the 75% capital and operating subsidy.
Yeah.
I know about the 3 cents on gasoline.
Right.
I know about the 53 cents on our light bills.
63.
Oh, it's up or down?
Yes.
63 cents on the light bills. I know about the possibility of property taxes going up to further cover the municipality's share of the deficit.
It's not likely to happen for a long time, but it's a
on the books.
possibility. Mm-hmm.
When? I mean, you know, there are reports this deep which have cost millions and millions and millions of dollars. Can you answer some simple questions? Has it been decided on light rapid transit? Has a decision been made?
No.
On light rail rapid transit?
A decision has not been made, and as you mentioned, we have any number of reports which all appear to indicate that we should be using the existing rights-of-ways, the existing lines, and I don't argue that at all. I think there's a lot of good information in all of those reports. I'm personally not convinced entirely that we must necessarily go completely with light rail. I think there's a good opportunity for monorail for several reasons. It's easier to get the rights-of-ways, it's a lot less noisy, you can run it up a hill, down a hill, over a ravine, along a river. There's any number of things that you can do with a monorail system. So I'm not completely sold on a one-way street.
Who will make the decision, apart from the improvement of the bus service, who will make the final decision on whether we have light rail rapid transit or, now you mentioned again, monorail? I thought that was down the tube.
No, I don't buy it.
Do you make the decision?
Tube. No, not entirely, although you must recognize that the provincial government pays by far the lion's share.
75%.
So therefore, we'll have and we'll play a very important role in making that decision. But initially, and hopefully We won't have too much debate or argument, but initially the information should come from the regional districts and the Urban Transit Authority.
We're talking selfishly at the moment about the Lower Mainland area.
That's correct.
Victoria, buses only.
No, for the foreseeable future, yes.
Will I live long enough, I'm now 62, Mr. Vander Zalm, to see a new high-speed method of commuter traffic in British Columbia?
Yes, you definitely will. I can see it happening fairly soon, and certainly the government has already shown its good intentions by putting $55 million into a capital fund.
That's just for buses at the moment, isn't it?
Well, not necessarily just for buses. I think what's important about that, however, is that the principle has been established that we must build a fund, and we must contribute to the fund from provincial resources, from provincial sources. And from there, we can decide as to what modes ought to be developed. But I do agree, Jack, that buses need to be developed first. It doesn't matter how expensive a light rapid transit system you develop. If you do not have a good feeder system, you can write it off as a total loss, and that's really what happened in many areas of the U.S.
Okay. I'll keep my nasty questions for the end.
Okay.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, that's good.
Call Bill Vander Zalm in Victoria by calling the usual numbers in the usual way, because we want to see if it works after the break. Northeastern Alberta.
Go ahead, Jack, try it.
Hello. Hello, Jack. Webster here. Speak up. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, Mr. Vander Zalm.
Oh, hold on, please, sir. You'll be the first call, and when I say go ahead, you go ahead. Just don't go away, sir. You're as clear as the proverbial bell.
It's working good.
Working real good. Hold on. Don't go away. Go ahead. The call from Victoria to William Vander Zalm. Go ahead. No, you were there.
I could just barely hear you.
Can you hear me now? You can hear me now.
Mr. Vander Zalm, I called your office. I'm calling from Victoria.
Yes, sir.
And I was informed that you were too busy to speak to me. I'm sure you are a busy man. However, I am a small businessman here on this beautiful island.
Right.
I phoned to complain about the $90 surcharge on my power bill. I don't think this is fair. I'm only operating a small business. I'm not Simpson Sears or Eaton's or the Bay. And I do not see why I, as a small businessman, should be taxed the same fee as them.
Do you understand the question?
Oh, I understand it well, and I agree with the gentleman.
Would you explain the surcharge to me?
Well, what happened in the case of the Capital Regional District, they decided not to adopt the gasoline charge, not to adopt the property tax, but to instead go entirely to a hydro surcharge. And the figures they've arrived at was $1 per month for or $12 per year for the residential homeowner, and that's fair enough, I suppose. That divvies it up equally among all of the people, whether they use transit or not. I don't think it relates quite as well as a gasoline tax, but anyway, that was their decision. The inequity came about when they applied it to industry and commerce. They applied it on the basis of a flat rate, $90 per year for every commerce or every industry.
You
so
mean
if
Bank of Montreal, the same as this little businessman?
Hudson's Bay, the same as the corner store. And
Crazy.
I think it's bad news. Now,
what can you do about it?
Well, firstly, I suppose we could simply come back, as the provincial government can often do, and say, look, we won't hear of it. That's the end of it. The difficulty there is that this is coming on stream April 1st. We've only got a week. The best we can hope for, I would suggest, sir, and I'm certainly striving towards that end, is to have it reviewed very quickly, and they can, in effect, implement the system and make changes by bylaw later on. But it is a capital regional decision. The gentleman is correct. I sympathize with him. I know it's wrong.
Who's the chairman of the board there?
Jim Campbell.
$90 whether you're a corner store or Simpson Sears.
That's correct.
It's totally unfair.
I agree.
Should have made them 900 and the little guy 50.
Well, it should be on a sliding scale somehow,
on
because
revenue,
after
on
all,
something.
if it's meant to relate to transit, there's much less traffic flowing from the corner store than there is from the department store.
At least you got through to Bill Vander Zalm this time. Thank you for your call, sir.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Next call from Vancouver. Go ahead, please.
Yes, good morning, Jack.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Vander Zalm. You most likely know who this is.
I can recognize the voice.
Yes, I thought so. The transit system for disabled people and handicapped. I see in Richmond in the news the other day that Richmond weren't going to go for the idea of the bus service for handicapped people in Richmond here. The lower mainland, yes, and other places so far. But with the disabled bus service for disabled people that would be required, they said they wouldn't be able to go for it, and they were,
What's your question?
too keen. So I was wondering, is there anything that can be done about this, Mr. Vander Zalm? You know me, and you know what I'm talking about.
Okay, here's the answer.
Well, we have implemented a program of transit for the handicapped by saying to the regions, if you take on transit, you can also take on special transit for the handicapped, and instead of your revenue from the fare box having to be 35%, we require only 10%. The Ministry of Human Resources will make up the difference between 10% and 35%, and we will share, as we do for the normal program, the balance of the cost or deficit. It's a great program. It's been well received by municipal people everywhere. I'm sure the region will adopt it. They'll make their arrangements with the Lions and other organizations already in the business, and they'll finally get out to areas like Richmond and Surrey and Coquitlam where previously there wasn't a service. It won't happen on April 1st, perhaps. It may not happen on July 1st, but it'll certainly happen in the very foreseeable future.
Does that make you happier?
That makes me feel a little better.
Thank you, sir. Nick
Pleasure.
Call from Vancouver. Go ahead, please.
Hello,
Yes.
Mr. Vander Zalm.
Yes, sir.
I live in Burnaby. Burnaby has put into effect a year ago or 18 months ago a special force to snoop on in suites.
They have a special inspector in Burnaby, of whom you're probably aware, who is...
Yes.
But my understanding is that the council has since told the man to back off.
That isn't true. I have already been summoned. I've already been charged on this area. Not charged.
Are you a man who went into a duplex and built a quadruplex?
No, I have a house. My mother-in-law lived with me for a while, and she died.
And then you rented the suite?
And I rented the suite.
You
yes.
must have had neighbor complaints.
Yes. And I had a complaint, and now I'm being brought into council.
I'm glad you called. I'm glad you called. I'm glad you called because Mr. Vander Zalm wasn't aware that charges are still being laid as a result
Well,
of
I'm not
complaints.
sure that it's a charge. I don't think the gentleman made that clear. But let's honestly face it. Right now, it is illegal. There's no provision for it in Burnaby or anywhere else. And if a neighbor complains, I think the council really has no alternative but to act on that complaint.
But I've spent $6,000 on the suite, inspected by the Burnaby building code, that it's fully capable of separate bathroom, separate entrance.
We understand all that, sir, but Mr. Vander Zalm is giving you the short answer. There's nothing he can do about it at the moment.
At the moment, however, as I said, I think Burnaby is doing what they must do if there's a complaint from a neighbor. But I think we can, and hopefully this might be worked out very soon, make a provision in legislation whereby they can permit under certain conditions or for a given length of time. Now, that isn't the end-all, but hopefully it'll help resolve some of the problems somewhere.
Let me know how you get on, sir, some other time.
Mr. Webster came up with the best thing I ever heard. With all this building and everything else, and the cost of fire protection, sewer, and all the rest for a municipality, and building houses and everything,
yes,
he came up with the best thing I ever heard is that
legalize it, but he's come up with the same thing and he calls it permitting.
Well,
and
yeah, okay. I think I should take that one step further because the gentleman is saying that it should be allowed all of the time because of these reasons, because it's cheaper sewer, cheaper fire protection, cheaper water, and so forth. Well, you know, that's why we have single-family zones, multi-family zones. That's why we have zoning in a municipality. There's a lot of people.
$1,300 taxes.
Just a minute.
But there's a lot of people that choose to pay more for a lot because it's in a single-family dwelling area, and they don't cherish people moving next door with 2 or 3 families. Agreed. So, you know,
you've made it so difficult and so expensive, you being government, to supply and build and service lots that if we are facing this 1,000 a month,
It's
and
a
this
crisis
real
right now.
crisis,
Yes.
perhaps emergency actions which don't please everybody will have to be taken.
Which is why I've said permitting. But this gentleman, having invested $6,000, is talking about maybe a permanent situation like that. I'm not talking about a permanent situation.
Thank you, sir. Next call, please.
Hello,
That's you.
Mr. Vander Zalm.
Yes, sir.
I had a house in Surrey, and I built 2 illegal suites downstairs in the basement. And of course, I didn't even have them inspected. However, later on, 3 years ago, they said that they wanted to inspect them and they would legalize them. So I paid the municipality $200 a year for each suite.
And did they legalize them?
I legalized, yes, definitely.
So what's your problem?
And, I beg your pardon?
Well, what
The house is 1379 on...
What's your question?
I beg your pardon?
What's your question?
he's making a
Do you know that they do legalize them in Surrey? And why
Yes.
couldn't they, if they do it, how do they get along in Surrey with legalizing them?
Well,
Okay.
I was the mayor in Surrey when we instituted the permitting system there.
Illegal act? Were you allowed to do it?
No, it can be done. The municipal council has the authority to do it. However, it would certainly give them a lot more clout if there were direction in legislation from Victoria stipulating as to what might be done or not be done under those circumstances. It would give them, you know, councils are reluctant to tackle that problem in that way, understandably too. The problem was disastrous in Surrey even already 6 or 7 years ago when I was the mayor there, and I said rather than putting all of these people out on the street, which we're not going to do anyway, let's permit them. At least then we'll have some control and they'll be paying something to the municipal coffers.
Still want to be Premier of the province?
No, I'm not looking to be Premier. I've got a good job right now for the time, and I want to go back to growing shrubbies.
You won the libel
Telling
suit.
people.
You lost the libel suit. You have one other appeal. Are you going to pursue it to the Supreme Court of Canada?
I've got to decide within the next week, and I'm just so right now. I don't know whether to go ahead or just stop it right there.
You might as well drop it, really.
I get some advice both ways.
Why don't you take common sense advice from an expert? My thanks to Bill Vander Zalm. Tomorrow morning, bar at 9 a.m. precisely. No, a break.
As long as I can see the monitor. 30? Okay. Okay.
I won't cue you unless we come up on you. They may come up on Jack first, so you look
Yeah.
at the monitor, and when they come to you, you'll see
Yeah.
both of you. But I'll give you the time down here.
Okay. Terrific.
Brian? Yeah. She's going to see that monitor already. Can you sit over so she can... That's it. Yeah.
Sorry, Brian.
It's all right. I'll be the director.
Mm.
Good morning, Linda.
Good morning. You did it to me
Hello.
again.
I can't hear you.
Hello.
Well, just
Can you
look,
hear
sit
me
there and
now?
look pretty, Linda. Put Linda's face up and I'll talk to her. We can't get your sound on it. The telephone calls work very well. Bill Vander Zalm sends his regards. Smile.
Tomorrow we have Dave Barrett and
Hi,
Grace
Linda.
McCarthy.
Can't hear you. Anyway, we've got Davy Barrett tomorrow morning from 9 till 10 and Grace McCarthy from 10 till 10:30. All times precisely. And it's tomorrow morning, Barrett at 9 a.m.
Bye-bye.
precisely. Thank you, Linda.